My late
Very
my,
cute.
my late mother's swim cap.
Oh, how very special.
I even have here's a picture of my mom wearing a similar hat.
Oh, how
Oh,
special.
yeah.
That is very special.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Either the most ridiculous animals I have ever seen or the most unique Homo sapiens. I'm not sure. I am certainly
Rabbi
not sure.
Borowski, you have to tell me, how did you do that? That's an interesting app that you have. Isn't that an app, or is that really on?
It's a zoom filter, just like and well, I'm pointing. I shouldn't do that. I should know better that it's in a different spot on everyone's screen. Just as Andrew's is also a zoom filter.
Oh, is that so? How do you do that?
The arrow next to your video camera, like where it says stop video, if you hit the caret that's next to it, and you go to choose video filter.
Oh.
You may or may not, depending on your device, have options. I also did this morning for religious school. I did this.
You play your device.
So, oh, and then on the other service, I did this one, didn't I?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
There are options.
So Barb just is adding things right now. Way to go, Barb.
You mean like that?
Yes, I love it, Barb.
Okay.
Ooh, that's a cool. And I don't know if I have that one.
Yeah.
I have none, which is really sad. I have no filters on my Zoom.
How do we get both of us to do it?
People have told me I have no filters.
I don't know that you can, Barb. I don't know that you can.
Just try
Oh, that's no fun. We'll have to go back and forth.
Yes, that's how she did it.
If Michael leans over, it'll probably jump to his face. Wait.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I just found something.
Oh, there you go, Stan.
Oh my gosh, Stan.
I might as well get into the act.
This is wonderful. I think, Andrew, you're going to need to take another screenshot.
Oh, definitely.
For sure, but let's all figure out what we
So everyone has to come up with something so that we can screenshot.
I gotta decide which one I want.
So much fun. You want to do anything, Mom? No. Okay, I didn't think so.
Silly Sunday. So
Yes. If anybody needs another description on how to find the Zoom filters, I am happy to share.
Yeah, I'm on my iPad.
Well, I'm going with this one. This is
the
the winner for right now. I'm gonna have a plant growing out of my head.
Well, Rabbi, you taught me something today. But let it be known that my Covatemble is actually real, not a.
So is mine.
Yeah.
My plant growing out of my head is not real.
Oh,
I do have real. I could go grab a real hat from the basement, but I did not. Yes.
So Jessica, how do you get the screen things?
Okay. Depending on your device, where you have the video camera in the corner where it says stop video, don't click that. But just to the right of it, there's a little caret that gives you options. You click on that little caret and then hit choose video filter.
Aha.
And then you get options.
Background and filters.
Yes.
if you're lucky.
And depending on your device.
Oh my goodness, check that out.
I have heard that tablets don't always work well, that it might have to be a computer.
Yeah, my iPad, I can't do that.
And my Mac.
I'm on a I'm on a
So if you're on a
laptop and
tablet, you just have to go get a real silly hat.
Susan's, yours really should. Make sure you're up at the latest.
I have the newest one and it doesn't.
It's weird because you and I have the
I know.
same team.
I know. I don't understand. Anyway, Andrew, whenever you're ready to take the picture. You're on mute again.
I've taken a few, but let's do
Okay.
it. Ready? On three. 1, 2, 3. There we go.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, should I start?
Let's do it.
Okay. In this week's Torah portion, Truma, we read the beautiful verse. Oh, I'm reading yesterday's introduction. Forget that. Let me try today's version. In this week's Torah portion, Titzavet, Exodus 27, verse 20 through 30, through chapter 30, verse 10, we learn about the Ner Tamid, a constantly burning light, for which the children of Israel are to provide the olive oil. We also learn about Aaron and his son's 7-day ordination ceremony. How fitting that we should begin reading this as our Rabbi Dudley Weinberg Scholar in Residence, Dr. Gary Zola, joins us one last time this weekend. For he represents HUC JIR, where Rabbi Berkson and Rabbi Borowski were ordained, and he helped to train Rabbi Borowski. I too had the pleasure of graduating from HUC JIR, though Cincinnati is the only campus I never studied at. More, Dr. Gary Zola, through his work as both professor and executive director of the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of American Jewish Archives, shines a light on the American Jewish experience so that we can learn from the past, be mindful in the present, and always be working for a better tomorrow. Before I turn the Zoom over to Dr. Zola, I would be remiss if I did not thank the members of the Scholar in Residence Committee, Ben Levin, Dr. Sherry Blumberg, Eve Jones Zucker, Robert Jacobs, Lois Brasner, Audrey Berman, Sherry Malman, and Rabbi Berkson. I would also like to thank my colleagues, Rabbi Borowski, Cantor Barash, and Andrew Appel, for all they do every day to make learning so very important for our entire congregation. Thank you, Rabbi.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and Shavua Tov, and it's great to be with you one last time, at least on this jaunt. I hope I'll have opportunities in the future to be together with you. I want to, before beginning, I also want to add again my words of gratitude to all those who reached out to make me feel so welcome, even under virtual circumstances. I appreciate all the hospitality. I even got a beautiful, beautiful bouquet of flowers on my birthday occasion from the congregation, and I'm so grateful for that. And to the committee that is working on this special lectureship in memory of Rabbi Weinberg, a blessed memory. And to all of you who planned it, thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the honor of being this year's teacher. I'm very honored and grateful. So for those who are perhaps joining for the very first time this weekend, I want to again give a fair warning that don't wait for a question and answer period. I don't really work that way. If you're waiting until the very end and expect to have a question and answer period, that might be a disappointment. You'll find we've exhausted the time and that's the end. So please feel free to just interrupt, put your hand up. Any question that you want to ask along the way is a worthwhile question, and we'll stop. It's important to definitely handle inquiries and comments as we go. Now, the topic today was publicized as American Exceptionalism, Past, Present, and Future. And really, I didn't bother to add an emendation to it because it's not so urgent. But really what I had discussed was the topic, I proposed discussing the topic of American Jewish exceptionalism, past, present, and future. And so maybe I should begin by talking about the difference between American exceptionalism and American Jewish exceptionalism, because they're actually two different concepts. First, we'll start with American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism, we've all heard that phrase, is a theory, an idea that the United States of America is inherently different, unique, special, set aside from all other nations. And this idea, there's a much that could be said. I'm just going to give a very peripheral introduction to the idea. It stems from the idea that from that the revolution itself, that the overthrowing of the autocratic government and the establishment radical ideas of the Enlightenment in the revolutionary period and then expressed in the Constitution created a unique nation of nations that is unlike any other nation in the world. Uh, a political scientist by the name of Seymour Lipset is quite famous for having promulgated this idea. And the idea is, of course, as I said, that Americanism, which is based on the concepts of liberty, equality before the law, individual responsibility, republicanism, representative democracy, laissez-faire economics, all of these things contribute to this idea of American exceptionalism. Now, I don't propose to analyze American exceptionalism this morning or to talk about it, but it could be said that it's a very controversial idea. We hear a lot about it, and lots of Americans like to adopt that as a true idea and to feel that we are special and unique, and there's no other nation like us. We're almost the new Zion in that regard. But it should be said that lots of others question that concept. Today, I want to talk to you about something that's a little more parochial, and that's the idea. The idea is, of course, as I said, that I'm getting some feedback here. Okay, now is the idea of American Jewish exceptionalism, and that, friends, is a little different because what that is based on this concept, widely believed among all Jews, that in all of the diaspora, meaning in all of Jewish life outside of our people's own homeland, no diaspora community has been more positive, accommodating, embracing, productive, go on with the words, than America for the Jewish citizens. And that idea of American Jewish exceptionalism, see, is slightly different from what I was talking about because it relates to this idea that in the diaspora, our heritage in the diaspora, our legacy has been a difficult one. It's hard to think of a nation where we have not suffered from oppression, and in many places we've suffered from brutal and cruel examples of oppression, such that the famous historian from Columbia University, Salo Baron, made a phrase very famous. He described diaspora history as the history, the lachrymose, that's a $25 word, lachrymose history of diaspora Jewry, meaning utterly filled with sorrow and disappointment. In contrast to that, the exception is America. Today, I propose to spend some time explaining why most American Jewish historians, up until just the last 5 or 6 years, have argued that America has been an exception, and that American Jewish life, or Jewish life in America, has benefited from certain conditions that did not exist anywhere else and do not exist anywhere else. But the reason Rabbi Berkson and I thought this might be an interesting session is because towards the end, we want to contemplate whether or not presently and as we're going forward, those exceptions still prevail. What I propose to do now is to explain why the conditions in America, what were the conditions or are the conditions that have enabled us to talk about this exceptionalism, and then give you some examples from history that will be interesting. And then finally, towards the end of our session, we'll have a chance to voice your opinion on whether or not you think the present and the future still is characterized by this exceptionalism. So that's our journey for today, okay? And you, again, just pop your hand up if you want to comment. Now, once again, I am going to engage in one of my few acts of pious devotion, and I'm going to try to share my screen, and hopefully it will not freeze as it did right before I spoke on Erev Shabbat. But if that should happen, have a sip of coffee and I'll come back. Okay. So, host has disabled participant. So one of the hosts is going to have to make me a co-host. There I go. Okay. And just a minute. I have to click a few buttons since I'm going to play something for you in a little bit. And now, just one quick minute while there I go. All right. So here we go. This should work. And I'm hitting share. I still see you. Can you see the title page? All right. Looks like we're in business. So let's begin with the reasons why. What is it that makes the American Jewish experience unique in all of diaspora history? What are the sources of this exceptionalism? I'm going to propose to you 4 today. I'm not going to argue that all 4 are exhaustive, but they're very important, and they're sort of the pillars of the theory. First, Jewish history in North America, that is the presence of an organized Jewish community, began long before the Republic. It goes back to the colonial period. So we're not what you call interlopers, because we were here as colonists, and therefore we were here from the very beginning of Jewish life on the North American continent. Dr. Marcus used to famously say, the first documented Jew to be wandering around the North American shores was a mineralogist by the name of Joachim Gauss. Gauss came here in 1585. So don't tell me about your pilgrim fathers. In comparison to my people, they were Johnny-come-latelys. So, but of course, one wandering Jew in 1585 doesn't make a community. And as I hope all of you know, and if you don't, you should memorize, because it's very important, that Jewish communal life, meaning the first time we had Jewish prayer, a minyan, a community organized, occurred in New Amsterdam in 1654. And there's been a continuous Jewish community of one sort or another in the North American continent ever since. So we go back a long time. And of course, that means that when it came time for the revolution, we were partisans in the revolution. There's no other example in world history. We of course there have been Jews who fought in revolutions, of course. For example, famously the Soviet Revolution. But you cannot argue that the Jews were present at the beginning of the Russian Empire or at the beginning of the Russian nation. So these 2 points, 1 and 2, go together. We were here from the beginning, before there was a nation, and then we fought to actually create the nation. So there's 2 reasons for exceptionalism. 3, very important, this is probably the one that would have popped into your minds, and that is that the U.S. Constitution is utterly special and unique to this day. It's pioneering separation of church and state. That didn't happen in France, even with all the French liberal, fraternité, liberal, and all of that characterized the revolution in France. It took a while before there was separation of church and state, and the guaranteed rights, not only civic rights that are in the Constitution, but the rights of individuals, right? The freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, all of that which comes into the Constitution through the first 10 amendments, or what we call the Bill of Rights. All of this is unique. And finally, and don't forget this because this is very contemporary issue, though it goes back to the beginning, that the U.S. Constitution is only as good as the independent judiciary. So I could, for example, show you a whole series of examples of constitutions. For example, the USSR's constitution, old constitution, or others that seem to be from despotic communities, seem to be very similar to our constitution in granting rights and so forth. The problem is, if you cannot prosecute your rights, if you can't go to the courts and take the government to court, and you can't defeat the government because the courts are in the pocket of the government, then it's a problem. Then minorities and so forth are in bad shape, very difficult circumstances. But if the courts are independent, and of course the way in which our founding fathers, I wish I could say fathers and mothers, but I can't, the founding fathers created the Constitution, you know that the federal judiciary, as well as the Supreme Court, is lifetime appointment. Their idea in doing that was to, at least hope was, to create a judiciary that did not need to be beholden to any government at all. Once you were in and you got into the court as a judge, federal judge or the Supreme Court, you were there for life and no one could touch you unless, something like moral turpitude. And so if you were an honorable person, you could make your decisions free of partisanship. And I'll just leave you to think about whether or not that idea is holding up today. I think we could argue that in some respects it is, and maybe in some respects it isn't. I don't know. But you understand the point that the Constitution is only as good as the independent judiciary. All right, so now we have these points. And what then has happened as a result of these points to Jewish life? In other words, what was the result of these conditions among the Jewish people? First, I'm going to talk about 3 things. Again, don't want anybody to go home and say, oh, Zola said there were only 3 things. I mean, these are 3 important ideas, but not exhaustive. So first is that we have always felt throughout all of American Jewish history, Jewish people, whether it's liberal Jews or the very most Orthodox Jews, have always felt that we are Americans and we are Jews. And that these ideas are never mutually exclusive. Never. The way I say it in class, Rabbi Goralski may recall, I always put it, if it's American, it's Jewish. And if it's Jewish, it's American. And when it appears that those two things are in conflict, we have to resolve them. So when the World Series comes out on Yom Kippur, that's a problem. It makes us feel like outsiders when we can't participate, and we have to find a way to do so. So that's the first unique idea that has come to Jewish life. We're Americans and we're Jews both. And that we express that idea in three ways. And here they are. Jews and Judaism, that is the religion and the people, have equal footing under the law in American life. That we propose that. Some people may come along and challenge that, but Jews have insisted that is the reality. And we have fought for that principle from the earliest days of the Republic to the present day. Number two, Jews and Judaism are entitled to the protection of the United States government, both in our country and abroad. So when we travel, and as American Jews, we carry the rights given to us by our Constitution if we're citizens, which we already argued we are. We carry those rights into any other place we travel. If we have a passport, if we have American citizenship, and we go to some place like Saudi Arabia that has all sorts of religious restrictions with regard to the intermixing of religion and state, the American citizen, Jew and non-Jew, are protected. They carry the rights that they have to do business and to do what they need to do with those rights. We believe in that, and we argue for that, and we won't accept anything less than that. A side issue related to this is, of course, that we call upon the American government not only to protect American citizens, but American Jewish citizens feel the right to go to the government and argue that it's our interest as Americans, not as Jews, but as Americans, to be concerned about Jews who live in other parts of the world. So if Jews living in other parts of the world are oppressed, are being treated cruelly, we have the right as American citizens to go to our government and ask the government to advance our cause. That, of course, in the 20th century, late after World War II, has expressed itself in our constant arguing that America and Israel share a common mission. We are allies, and we do not hesitate to argue our case to the American government that we as American citizens, we happen to be Jews, but there may be others who are not Jewish. We are entitled to make that case. All of that is under point two. And the final point is, because we're a minority, Jews are a minority, we are very attuned to the constitutional reality that in America, basically life works by majority rules. So in elections, of course, this brings us to present and future, but in elections, when people win the majority, they win the election. And we understand that. On the other hand, there are also certain things that have nothing to do in American life with majority rule, and that we call minority rights. So there are rights that we have in the Constitution, given in the Constitution, that cannot be taken away from us. So we have the right, for example, to speak. And we have the right to speak as Jews. And we have the right to articulate a minority opinion. And that's what you might call given to us by our Creator. And you could go on and name a number of others that are, that you can think of right now as I'm talking, that are that you can't vote them out. In other words, we can't have an election that says you cannot assemble. The majority of our state does not want Jews to assemble, or Sikhs or any other group. You can't do that. Now, don't forget, apparently one of our QAnon congresswomen seems to not know this, but of course the Constitution can be amended. That is built into the Constitution. So whatever I'm saying right now is about the Constitution and its status today. So if through the proper legal channels the Constitution were changed so that it said we are a Christian nation and there is no longer separation of church and state, of course that could happen. In fact, there's been in history an argument for that ever since the Civil War. It's pretty died down as of the 1920s, but we still hear people talk that way. So what am I saying in short, and that's not easy for me to say anything in short, is that Jews are very concerned about minority rights. And initially, they were consumed with minority rights for themselves. But as time has gone on and our community's grown larger, and especially in the 20th century, but not exclusively, Jews have been generally concerned with minority rights, not only for themselves, but for others. So here are 3 reasons. I've given you 4 reasons that are the basis of exceptionalism, and 3 examples of how that exceptionalism has enabled us to flourish over the course of history to this point. Now, having said all of that, that's the background. I want to now give you a few examples of each. So this is where we have some historical examples. So remember, our first example was that Jews and Judaism itself possesses equal footing under the law, and that the government must not advantage one religious group over another. That's we claim that's built in, it's baked into America's system, and that's how we have argued. Jews, I'm trying to teach you that Jews have taken this point from the very beginning of the Republic to the present day. We have argued this, and when challenged or assailed, we fight for this ideal because we claim it's what makes America special. Now I've got to prove it to you with a document. So here we go. Here comes class participation. Who would like to read this document? And we're going to analyze it just like Rabbi Borolsky and I used to do in class. So who would like to read this? It's a special document. I found it myself when I was working on my PhD and reading newspapers in Charleston, South Carolina. This was long before digitization. So I deserve a lot of credit because I had to sit there and turn pages. I didn't have to just punch in a word and there it came up magically. So I spent hours and hours, and I came across this article and I made a picture of it, and I've ultimately a few years ago I published it and wrote about it. Who would like to read this document? Now it's in English, so everybody can do this. This is called group participation, so don't be shy. Who would like to read it?
I believe Dr. Sherry Blumberg has raised her hand.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Blumberg, would you mind? And I'm going to interrupt you periodically, and I'm going to analyze things after you give us a beautiful reading.
to the public, having a dispute with Dr. Edward Chisholm and feeling myself insulted by an illiberal expression made by him, I applied to a gentleman of respectability and honorable feeling to call on Dr. Edward Chisholm and to demand an apology. If this was not promptly given, then to demand the only redress that honor has long established as the practice in these cases. Dr. Chisholm, through his friend, answered that he would give me no satisfaction and that I was not.
Oh, let's stop right there. So before we go on to Dr. Chisholm through his friend, just let's make sure we're clear that everybody knows what's going on, what's happening here. Dr. Blumberg, what's going on?
Well, he made a statement that must have said that Jews are not worth the trouble he's going through.
Right, and so what is our writer, Mr. Cohen, asking for?
First an apology, or then perhaps a duel.
That's right. That's what I'm getting at. In other words, it's quite clear that he's been insulted, Mr. Cohen, and he wants an apology. And if he doesn't get an apology, then we're in the South, right? We're in Charleston. He wants what any gentleman deserves, and that's a duel. This is, of course, Mr. Cohen, I think we're going to find out in just a minute, is without question a Jewish Mr. Cohen. So now we read on, Dr. Blumberg, Dr. Chisholm.
Okay, he answered he would give me no satisfaction, that I was not on a footing with him because I was a Jew, nor did he conceive any Jew to be on a footing with him.
Okay, so here we have quite clearly, if you think that challenges to our citizenship is a new 20th century phenomenon, no, it goes right back to the beginning. It's quite clear. Dr. Chisholm, at least, doesn't feel that he has to apologize for a thing because, no Jew is his citizen equal. And not only is Mr. Cohen not his equal, but he apparently told his friend, those Jews, I don't have to treat them like everybody else and give them the honor that everybody else deserves because they're Jews. They're not my equal. And Dr. Blumberg's now going to continue.
As such, a subterfuge as this marks the individual not only with illiberality, my ignorance, but with cowardice. It therefore becomes my painful duty to intrude these remarks on the public in order to expose him to the community in which I live, the place of my nativity.
Now, if you don't have pride in your ancestors, this document should fill you with pride, because just think of what's going on here. Mr. Cohen has asked for an apology. And if he doesn't get the apology, he wants the same treatment that every other human being in the South is entitled to get, which is a duel. And of course, the response was, you're not even worth spitting on. I don't have to give you a duel. I don't have to treat you like a man. You're not my equal. And so he then has no alternative, so he feels, but to take out an ad in the newspaper and to take his complaint to the entire Charleston community who reads the paper. And he's going to insult Dr. Chisholm in front of the community. And here comes the most magnificent paragraph of all. If this doesn't move you, I don't know what will. Go ahead, Sherry, you're doing beautifully.
Thank you. The Constitution of the United States and of my native state give me and every citizen of every religious denomination equal rights and equal privileges. Religious distinction are not known in this country. Members of the same community are valued only according to their conduct in life, and none but a bigot and a coward like Edward Chisholm would attempt to insult a whole nation by refusing that satisfaction to which every gentleman is ready to give and to receive.
So in short, when I tell you that from early on, Jews have taken the position that we are citizens, we are on equal footing with any citizen, that being a Jew does not make you the other. We are American and we are Jewish. We are both at once. And as this man puts it, only a bigot and a coward like Edward Chisholm would insult a whole nation in this way. This is just one example, but I'm now going to give you a second example, and that has to do with this gentleman, Jacob Ezekiel. And now we're also in the 19th century, but we're going to the year 1840. Who was Jacob Ezekiel? Jacob Ezekiel was an American-born citizen, born in the year 1812 in Philadelphia. But as a young man, he moves to Virginia, to Richmond, where he sets up business. Apparently, in the 1830s, he met personally his congressman. His congressman was a man by the name of John Tyler. Some of you may recognize that name if you remember your civics classes, where you learned the slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. This is John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States. Most people have no idea anything about, they don't know anything about John Tyler. Tyler was a congressman from Richmond, Virginia, before becoming the vice president. And then, of course, another fact that most people don't know is he's one of those who actually joined the Confederacy after his presidency. So years later, he left the United States and became a Confederate congressman, and that is John Tyler. But Jacob Ezekiel, the father of the famous artist Moses Ezekiel, knew this vice president. And as you probably all know, in the year 1840, in the election, the famous general, William Henry Harrison, was elected president of the United States. And he was the oldest president elected at that time. And anybody know what happened to William Henry Harrison after his election? Anybody have the answer? Paul, is that your hand that's up, or am I imagining? Yeah, you got to turn your mic on.
No, I'm just drinking water. Sorry.
Oh, okay, it's okay. It's all right. That's quite all right. Anybody know what happened? Yes, Audrey, please.
He died very quickly.
Yes, what happened? Do you know?
He got pneumonia after speaking outside at a speech.
Yes, his inaugural speech. He spoke a long time, and he apparently was cold or it was rainy or whatever it was. And, he spoke, I think something like 2.5 hours. Of course, any member of any Jewish congregation, any synagogue, any rabbi for sure would know if the surest way to end up dead would be to speak for 2.5 hours, just in general. You don't need a rainstorm. But he basically, I'm exaggerating a bit, but basically he fell ill right after inauguration. He had a temperature. He ended up with pneumonia, and there was no medicine to help the poor president. And within 30 days, he had passed away. So suddenly, for the first time in American history, the vice president, this is in the Constitution, this is the first time this ever happened, the vice president ascends to the presidency. An interesting story. And the first proclamation, just like Mr. Biden issued proclamations on the first day, the first thing that John Tyler does is he issues a proclamation to the nation, which was carried in all the newspapers. And the proclamation asked Americans to please go to their houses of worship and say memorial prayers for the fallen president, William Henry Harrison. There's only one problem which brings us to Mr. Ezekiel. And that problem is that the proclamation begins with the words, given that we are a Christian people.
Mm.
He begins with those words. So Mr. Ezekiel decides to write a letter. This letter is an original. We have it at the American Jewish Archives. Very precious, wonderful document. And as you can see clearly, it's written April 15th, a month after the administration begins, 1841. And as you see, he writes at the top, to His Excellency, John Tyler, President of the United States, esteemed and respected friend. Now, I assert that that is a peculiar way to address the President of the United States if you do not know him. But clearly, this man was his congressman. He knows him, and he feels a connection to him. Now, I'm not going to read this whole letter. I'm just going to pull out, there's the date. I'm just going to pull out nice and big for you one section to give you an idea of how I'm again proving to you that we have fought from the beginning that against anyone who would disclaim the exceptionalism of America. We won't allow them to argue that we're not Americans, that we're outside of it. We are arguing that we're part of the people. Now look at what he says to the president. You can read along with me. It's a beautiful hand, fair hand. I, as well as others, were somewhat surprised to find in the columns of our journals, as in the age in which we live, that the chief magistrate of this union should, by an official recommendation to the people of the United States, address a, quote, Christian people as being overtaken by a great public calamity, close quote. No doubt forgetting that during the revolution of this country, blood of all denominations was shed for its freedom. And in those days, there was no distinction. It was not asked whether it was Christian, Jewish, or pagan blood that flowed freely for the liberty we all now possess. You got to be proud of our forebears. They were chickens. And in other words, the president himself seems to have forgotten that there were others who were part of the people from the beginning. This is the point that I've been making. And Mr. Ezekiel, on our collective behalf, writes to the president and chastises him, sandpapers his rear end, and tells him what he's done is wrong, and he should never do that. Now, I don't have time today to show you the answer, but we also have the answer because Tyler responds, and I'll just tell you, you'll invite me back and I'll teach you more about this letter because I don't want to have you here till 5 p.m. But I do believe the reason we have both of these letters is because you see the writing that's vertical here on the left side. That says in Mr. Ezekiel's handwriting, this is the letter that is an answer to my letter from the president. He's basically saying, and if you can see there are creases in the letter, my theory is that Tyler got the letter, opened it up, read what Ezekiel wrote, and then wrote out by hand, as you can see his name is there, wrote out by hand the response. This was in the days when presidents had to write their own letters, and folded it up with Ezekiel's letter and sent it back to Ezekiel. And therefore, Ezekiel kept it the rest of his life. And then later in his life, he moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he became the first secretary of the Board of Governors of the Hebrew Union College in 1875. And that's how we have this letter. And if you want to know what Tyler said, I can tell you that very quickly. Tyler basically said, shows you got to have a little admiration for him. He didn't get where he got because he was stupid. He says, you are right, he says to Ezekiel, but you did not read to the very end of my proclamation, because as I conclude, my wording is all Americans should go to their houses of worship, and therefore don't pay any attention to what I said at the beginning of my proclamation. The end of my proclamation is what I really meant. And then he goes on in this letter to lather up the Jewish people and tell Ezekiel how much he loves the Jewish people and how much he admires them and all that they've given to humanity, and therefore the problem is solved. So he was a politician. Now I'm going to unfortunately, I don't have time today to go into point 2, though I could demonstrate with documents how Jews, in fact, have argued on behalf of free rights that they're entitled to in other parts of the world, that the American protections, the rights that we have as Americans, entitle us to go and be Jews openly wherever we are as American citizens. And I could show you all sorts of examples of how we have fought for our oppressed brothers in other parts of the world. This goes back to the 19th century. But I don't have time today, so I'm going to my third point, which is brings us towards the end, and that is I'm going to talk about our interest in minority rights. Now, I have to beg you to believe me that Jews do begin to think about this topic beyond themselves, beyond themselves. So, for example, you could make the case that both Mr. Cohen and Mr. Ezekiel were fighting for their civil rights as Jews. Now I'm talking about fighting for civil rights for other minorities, and Jews have been doing that ever since the late 19th century. Jews were involved and spoke out about the oppression of Chinese immigrants and the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s. And Jews spoke out, American Jews, about issues of immigration. And Jews began in the 1890s to become interested in the concerns of African Americans. And many of you know that the NAACP, which was founded in the year 1909, was established with the help of a number of Jewish citizens, liberals, who had had their fill of lynchings and wanted to create an organization which would bring an end to that and to advance the cause of colored people in America. There are lots of examples before World War II. But we don't have time to go into each and every one of those, but just let you know that I'm not unmindful of all those examples. I'm taking you, though, to a powerful example having to do with, again, our friend Rabbi Stephen Wise, about whom I spoke the other day. Was anybody required, like I was in high school, to read Native Son by Richard Wright? Anybody? Susan, you say you were. Do you have any recollection of the book at all that you could summarize basically what's going on, or no? No. Well, I'll do this very quickly or you won't understand the document. Richard Wright is an African American, a Black writer, and he writes a fictional work called Native Son, and he creates a figure. The protagonist is a man by the name of Bigger Thomas, who's a Negro man who suffers from the indignities and the structural inequality, that's the wording we would use today, of American life. And we learn later in the book that he has to resort to robbery, and he breaks into a house He's robbing a white woman who finds him in the process of this. He's frightened. She's screaming. So he takes a pillow, puts it over her mouth, and inadvertently, unintentionally, he ends up suffocating her because she won't stop screaming. He's then he goes to court and he'll be convicted. The book ends with Bigger Thomas waiting for his execution. But Richard Wright writes into the book a character who is the lawyer to defend him. And the lawyer is quite clearly a Jewish lawyer in the book. So this black writer writes in a character who's a Jewish lawyer. And according to Richard Wright's novel, there's some line in there where the Jewish lawyer says, "We know for sure there's no way on God's green earth that this man's not going to be convicted, because when they choose a public defender to defend the black man, if they choose a Jew, there's no one who the jury hates more than black people than the Jewish lawyer." So the Jewish lawyer in the book is also a very heroic character. He gives a valiant defense. He speaks on behalf of the Negro in general, but he fails, and that's how the book ends. This book becomes a bestseller in New York at the time in 1940, and like all good rabbis, Rabbi Wise decides he's going to speak about the book in one of his sermons. And I explained to you I have all these recordings that no one else has. Not that they're in my closet, but they're available to the public only through the American Jewish Archives, in which you should all take great pride. And I'm going to play a clip. You're going to get a chance now to hear Stephen Wise speaking a little bit about Native Son. Listen carefully to what he tells the people who are listening to him about why Jews need to be concerned about the rights of others. And wave to me if you're not hearing the voice.
We're not.
Okay, let me try again.
If you'll share your sound as well, that would be.
I thought, just a minute. Okay, let me try again. Okay. You all seeing the picture of Native Son? All right, let's try it again. I'm sorry.
To me, as I read Native Son, the word and the mind and the understanding and compassionate soul of the Jewish lawyer became to me at one and the same time symbol, rebuke, prophecy, challenge. Symbol of what the Jew should be and do in relation to other races that are oppressed and ground into the dust. And I remembered the very sage and shrewd observation personally made to me a generation ago by Israel Zengin, and repeated in one of his last volumes. If only the Jews could forget their own fate, however bitter, and remember and try to better the fate of another, some alien race such as the Negro race. After all, we Jews, as no other people, we know the heart of the oppressed. And I can't help saying to you, if there be any Jews in this congregation today who hail from the South, they are likely profoundly to disagree with me, but I must speak the truth as I see it. The indifference of the Jew, child of 35 centuries of civilization, his own. The indifference of the Jew throughout the country, save for rarest exceptions, to the fate of the Negro race is deeply dishonoring to the Jew. I feel a double obligation to every oppressed race and to every wronged man on earth. For I am an American and I am a Jew. All I can say to you as I close is this. The time is come, in part as a result of the writing of this extraordinary indictment of the white race in its study of abnormal criminality. The time is come for Americans to bethink themselves, to think through and over again the whole problem of relations. And I suppose I can't help feeling, what if others fail? What if Christians fail? What if Catholic and Protestant churches fail? Must we fail because they do? Must our Judaism remain a mockery and a pretense? Even if it be true that Christianity, Christendom has suffered oceanic and even infinite wrong to be laid upon the body and the soul of the Negro race.
There you are. You get to hear, again, going back nearly 80 years, how it must have felt to listen to Stephen Wise. This is a very rich document, and I could unpack it for quite some time. But you heard yourself how he basically is arguing that our job is not to be just concerned about our own fate. Our job is to be concerned about the fate of others who are oppressed as well. This is my third point about minority rights. And this, by the way, is 1940, so it's before, Brown versus Board of Education. He points out, he recognizes in this tape, he says in his speech, if there are Jews from the South in this congregation, they're not Jews. They're not going to agree with me. But I'm going to tell you what I believe. And then the interesting part is how he ends, where he says, what if Catholics fail? What if Protestant fails? Must we fail? And that's an interesting statement. And my theory on that is that he has heard from Jewish congregants or from opponents to his ideas. They're probably saying to him, Rabbi, we're a minority. They hate us. We didn't do this. It's not our obligation. Why should we risk ourselves when people don't even like us? Just like the lawyer. And that's why Wise is saying it doesn't matter that the others are failing. It doesn't matter, he says. We have to be self-respecting. So here you have an early example of someone who's very influential, calling for Jews to be attuned to the needs of the Black community and their oppression, because we understand these problems, he says, and we are obliged to be concerned about minority rights. And that, of course, will play itself out in a number of examples that occur after school segregation is banned. I talked a little bit about this yesterday, and I'm going to show you a few other examples I didn't get a chance to show you. I spoke to some of you who are here about how Dr. King would go into synagogues and he would appeal to synagogue groups and say to them basically the same thing, but coming from a Black man, a Black leader, the same thing that Rabbi Wise said many years earlier, and that is, you Jews should understand what our circumstance is, and you should be motivated to help us. Listen to how Dr. King talks to the Beth Emmet congregation in Evanston, Illinois, in January of 1958.
It's Doug's temple.
Yeah.
But I want to say to you that there are certain things within our social system to which I'm proud to be maladjusted, and to which I call upon you to be maladjusted. I never intend to adjust myself to the evils of segregation and the crippling effects of discrimination. I never intend to become adjusted to the madness of militarism and the self-defeating effects of physical violence. This evening I call upon you to be maladjusted to all of these things. For you see, it may be that the salvation of our world lies in the hands of the maladjusted. I call upon you to be maladjusted. Yes, as maladjusted as Amos, who in the midst of the tragic injustices of his day could cry out in terms that echo across the generations, let judgment run down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. As maladjusted as Lincoln, who had the vision to see that this nation could not exist half slave and half free. As maladjusted as Jefferson, who in the midst of an age amazingly adjusted to slavery could cry out in terms lifted to cosmic proportion, all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
So here you see really the same argument where Dr. King says to the Jews he's speaking to, you are countercultural. You always have been, and you need to speak up. Don't adjust yourselves to the American reality. Speak out on our behalf. Speak out for these principles, and again, calling upon the Jews to be concerned about minority rights. Now, one last example, and then we're going to have a little conversation, and then we'll conclude. Okay, everybody holding up okay? All right. The last example, the last example has to do with a whole series of bombings that, began to occur at the same time that we just heard Dr. King speak. The first example of that, as far as I know, took place in Charlotte, North Carolina, but many examples. This list is not exhaustive. I want to focus, though, on Nashville, Tennessee, the arrow that's pointing to number 4, where the Jewish Community Center was bombed on March the 16th, 1958. Why were all these buildings, Jewish buildings and synagogues, bombed starting in 57 and so forth? And that is because the same sort of atmosphere that we experience today, that has reemerged today, and that is the basic idea that those who are challenging the status quo, who want to open up society to all different kinds of groups, who want to argue for freedom for those who quote unquote don't belong, those ideas could only come, so these bigots say, from Jews and a world conspiracy of Jews. And therefore, because from the perspective of these bigots, the Negro or the black man couldn't possibly, in his or her state, couldn't possibly concoct all of this just on their own desire for freedom. Oh no, says the bigot. It has to be a plan that only a clever international conspiracy of Jews who control money and control governments. And we're hearing the same kind of thing today. And this is, of course, one of the big complaints that the KKK or the Ku Klux Klan began to assert, that why black and Jews are, equally problematic from their point of view. So when the Nashville Jewish Community Center was bombed, here's a picture of it on the 16th. The person who was most blamed for this was the local rabbi. His name was William Silverman, and William Silverman was an advocate in the early, as soon as Brown versus Board of Education, advocate for the destruction, the deconstruction of segregation. And he spoke about, in Nashville, Tennessee, about integration. And as a result, there was fear that Friday night following this bombing, the temple would be bombed. And so the people of the temple, many, not all, probably only a few, came to the rabbi and said, we can't have services this Friday. The rabbi insisted that there be services, and he intended to speak about the bombing. There were services, and he did speak about the bombing. And he later claims, as you'll hear in a minute, that the temple was filled. But Rabbi Silverman, about 10 years later, reflects on this day, on this occasion, in an interview that was taken by a rabbinical student in the year 1967. So it's about a decade later. I'm going to play just a bit of it for you. And it's not a great tape because the rabbinical student made the recording on a cassette tape that was probably purchased from Walgreens or something like that. So the quality after all these years is not that great. But if you listen carefully and watch the words, you'll get the message. Okay, here we go.
And of course, I'll never forget the first Friday night after the dynamiting of the Jewish Community Center. They had threatened to dynamite the temple that night. And I was urged by some members of the Board of Trustees to call off services. And I said the services will not be called off. Anybody who's frightened need not attend services. There will be adequate police protection. Now remember that as you came to services, you had to be identified by police. And you had to show some identification. But we had a packed temple. It was like Rosh Hashanah. And I don't remember the exact title of my sermon. I think it's on record, and perhaps it's in the archives there, but it was that we will not yield. Here was the point that they say, Rabbi, stick to the Bible. Well, this is the Bible. This is what the Bible teaches. Rabbi, stick to the Talmud. This is what the Talmud teaches. Rabbi, stick to Judaism. This is Judaism. And many times as I carried a gun, I thought to myself, well, hey, what am I doing? They're carrying a gun. I'm not a gunsel. I'm a rabbi. My job is to teach Judaism. And I said, damn it, this is Judaism. To defend principle and to fight for principle and not just talk about justice, but to actually work for it.
So let me now for a moment stop sharing, and we can all talk for a few minutes. So I have tried to teach you today about American Jewish exceptionalism. And I've tried to argue that this exceptionalism is based on the fact that we were here in the colonial period, that we fought in the revolution, that the Constitution is unique, and that we have an independent judiciary. And I argued that whenever these ideas were challenged, which they were from the very beginning, American Jews have argued 3 cases, not exclusively, but those are the 3 I talked about today, that they've argued we are citizens like everyone else. We're not other. We are a portion of the people. Number 2, that our rights we carry with us even abroad, and we have the right to advocate for Jews in other parts of the world, though I didn't show you proof of that. I could have. And number 3, that we are concerned and continue to be concerned with preserving and strengthening minority rights, because not only are we a minority and therefore it behooves us to fight for minority rights, but as Rabbi Silverman just said, it's also part of our ethical tradition, right? That's what the rabbi said. He said, you know, the congregants say, hey, Rabbi, stick to the Bible. Rabbi, stick to the Talmud. And the rabbi's response is, that's what I'm doing. That's what we're taught. And so let's end before we have one final concluding document. What do you folks think? Do we still have the hope today and into the future for an American diasporic exception, or is that now in question? Anyone have some thoughts on that he or she would like to share? I hope I haven't stupefied you in all this time. Yes, George, please.
For the most times in the history of the American Jewish community, government has been accommodating to us in regards to our civil rights. Now I see several congresspersons who are anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, and there seems to be some rise in Congress, both from the political left and the political right, of anti-Semitism in government, not only in universities and other institutions, but in government, which is what scares me.
Okay. I'm going to encourage other comments, but just want to say that I do not disagree with anything you said, George. The only thing I want to add to it is this is not the only time in American Jewish history where we have seen that. I could teach about that. But that is not to say that I'm comparing anything in the past to the present. That cannot be done. We're always have to be aware of the changing and shifting context of history. But there have been bigots, outspoken bigots in Congress long before our current batch. But I'm going to push you, George, and then others. I want to hear from your thoughts. I see David has his hand up, and some others. Just quickly, George, do you feel that the exceptionalism in America may be under threat? When you say that this scares you, do you feel that America is potentially not going to be the exception to the diaspora story?
Yes.
Okay. Fair enough. Some of you others, who had their hand up? David, did you?
I did.
Yes, please.
I take exception to what George says in this respect only.
the threats that he sees, I concur. They are there. They are rising. But I would disagree in that that would imply that they haven't been there in the past. And you don't have to go back very far or look for huge spaces where you won't find it. In our own history, although before just a few years before I was born, we had the president and the secretary of war at that time who said that we couldn't afford to waste the gasoline or the bombs to bomb the tracks into the death camps.
All right, other comments. I see Stan and Lynn. We'll go in that order. Okay, Stan, you're next, and then Lynn, and then others before we conclude.
Okay, Doctor. Yesterday, you said very clearly, and I quote you, we cannot remain silent when we see or hear wrong.
That's correct. You heard me correctly.
Okay, I agree with you. But on the other hand, did we?
Well,
or didn't
okay,
we?
that is a great that would be my segue into conclusion. And so I want all of you to hold Stan's comment in abeyance in the parking lot. I'll return to it because Lynn is next, and then is it Norm? Is that after that? Okay, go right ahead, Lynn, please.
Just jumping off what others have already said, I want to emphasize what you said about John Tyler's remarks, that we are a Christian nation. And the reason that I think that that's important is that that is one of the governing principles today of the extreme right wing, the so-called white supremacists. And I do think that it is an obligation of American Jews today to actively work and speak against this notion that we are a white Christian nation. That was not the intention of the founders, and it is not an accurate portrayal of what this nation is.
Well, I certainly agree with you. And again, I see if Rabbi Boralski will remember, I often in class tell the rabbinic students when they confront this, I say to them, your job is to help Christians understand that there's a big difference between a nation in which the majority of its people are Christian and a Christian nation. That's your task as a rabbi. In other words, no one can deny, it's not true to say that the majority of the people in this country are not Christian. They are. So there is a majority people who are Christian. That's the majority of the people. But there's a big difference between that and the concept of a Christian nation. And it's our task as Jews, as you said, Lynn, to help people understand that. They could still feel good. People can feel good about the idea that the majority religion is Christianity. There's no one who will question that. But there's a big difference between that and a Christian nation. Okay, Norm, I think you were next.
My thought was less on the Jewish exceptionalism than on the foundations of the Constitution that you talked about in the beginning, and the idea of the separate judicial branch, because I think that I think we are on the precipice, and I don't know which way it's going to go. I think these last 4 years have been challenging on many, many, many fronts, and there's starting to be some pushback. And I think the future of our nation, the future perhaps of our people and all minorities, depends on whether we go back to a judiciary that enforces the law or enforces philosophy.
Well, that's a good point, and that enables me now to connect up with what Stan had said, and then I'm going to play my last document and we'll end because you've put in a lot of good time. Uh, uh, I agree, Norm, with what you said and what I think Stan was saying, which is that the only thing we can say from the past with certainty is that Jews, our predecessors, have definitely been confronted with bigotry and with threats of second-class citizenry. And I could spend hours and hours, I could do a whole semester illustrating that reality. There has been anti-Semitism in this country from the colonial period to the present. There have been bigots in Congress. There have been accusations. You're probably thinking about Henry Ford and the Dearborn Independent. He basically accused, it was the same theory that it's just a permutation of the protocols of the elders of Zion. That's what he used in his newspaper. Minister Farrakhan, his books on the secret relationship between blacks and Jews is nothing more than another permutation or variation of that same idea. We could go on and on and on. What has characterized, though, also our predecessors, as Stan and I believe, in a sense, Norm was saying, is that we have fought for the American ideal. And so when we talk about the present, I'm in agreement with the people who said we don't know what the future is going to bring. We do not know, because historians are pretty good at describing what has happened. We're not very good at predicting what will come. But one thing we can say is that if, and this is my connecting up to Stan, if we remain silent, if we throw in the towel, if we stop worrying about others who are oppressed and just try to think only of ourselves, if we don't involve ourselves in the same way that our predecessors have demonstrated in the past and taught us that we got to where we are with their help, and I've given you proof today of that, then I think the road ahead is much less certain. So we will have to see. But let's end with the idea that the future is in our hands, not just this group, but the American Jewish community. We have, to this end, we have a very dignified and proud history. And now the question, I sort of said this also on Friday night, the question is, when his future students look back at our time, and of course that doesn't just include the people here who are septuagenarians and octogenarians and nonagenarians. It also applies, of course, to the 20-year-olds and the 30-year-olds and the 40-year-olds, everybody. It's up to us to not just talk about history, but to resolve to make history. I'm going to end with a beautiful way to end, and that is, believe it or not, the very last address given by Rabbi Alexander Schindler in the year 2000. I presume all of you know the name of Rabbi Alexander Schindler. If you don't, he was the president of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, now known as the Union for Reform Judaism, a very eloquent speaker. And he retired, I believe, around from his presidency around 1995, and he died in November of 2000, quite unexpectedly at the age of 75, I believe. And Rabbi Schindler, the week before his death, the last time he spoke in public, he spoke in Baltimore, at Baltimore Hebrew Congregation. He delivered the Morris Lieberman lecture, just like Zola is teaching the Dudley Weinberg lecture. But God help me, I want to be around next week too. So you listen to the just little excerpt. This is how we'll end. What Rabbi Schindler, his last message, just a little excerpt from it, from this famous address that he gave just 1 week before his passing. Oops.
I recall my attendance in recent years at one of the annual Holocaust commemorations held yearly under the dome of the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. The speaker at that particular occasion was Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, who proudly identified himself to the assemblage as an American and as a Jew. Present were all the other justices, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course, scores of senators, representatives, members of the cabinet, men and women of every faith. And as American soldiers paraded past us, bearing the flags of those regiments that had liberated extermination camps, I could not help but remember how powerless, utterly helpless we Jews were but 50 years ago, and to feel awestruck by how we have moved as a community from the fringes to the very center of the world's power. Now, best of all, we have done so without abandoning our Judaism, our Jewish values, our Jewish commitment to community. Justice Brandeis famously proclaimed that the 20th century ideals of America have been the ideals of Jews for 20 centuries. We have ennobled this land, even as this land has ennobled us. Jewish citizenship has helped to create an America not only of entitlement and privilege, but also of blessing and of responsibility. And in turn, America, this golden Medina, this land of gold, has provided a safe haven for a new golden age of Judaism.
Well, friends, I think that's the challenge before us. Just the way Rabbi Schindler put it, we have a responsibility. And you are living proof, all of you who've joined today, all 31 of you, or 30, I guess I'm number 31, all 30 of you who are here are part of what the living proof that Schindler is right. We have not forsaken our connection to Jewish community and to Jewish life. And the future is our responsibility. So we can't foresee the future, but we can try to make it. I want to thank all of you for, see, most of you have been with us for the whole weekend. It's been a real treat for me to be with you. I genuinely hope and pray that it won't be too long before some of you can come and visit as the rabbi put it very correctly, the historic Cincinnati campus of Hebrew Union College and the American Jewish Archives. And if I can help in any way in the years ahead, please feel free to write to me. It would be my pleasure. So either Rabbi or Susan, I pass it on to you.
So we want to give you, first of all, Dr. Zola, a huge thank you. It has been wonderful. For me personally, it has been wonderful learning from you again, and for everybody here on Zoom. And as Mike pointed out in the chat, we'll have to get the count later on how many people were also streaming online, watching on Facebook. It's more than just the 30 Zoom boxes you see in front of you. But thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been wonderful to dive deeply into so many topics this weekend, and to really learn so much and have some great discussions. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. And I want you all to plan to come to Cincinnati for Caitlin's ordination. You produced this young future rabbi, and you should all take pride in her accomplishments. So she may be upset that I'm doing this, but that's okay. You can, Mom, you can tell her I invited the entire congregation to come and watch ordination.
Lois, you'll have to make sure that we have the details so we can send it out so that we can at least all virtually watch, even if we're not there in person. Thank you, Dr. Zola.
Thank you.
And to everybody here, we are looking forward to seeing you at our many, many, many Purim events, which begin which have already begun with the Hamantash and baking. And beyond that begins with the Cantors and Friends concert this evening, and continues with events just about every day this week, all the way up through Friday. So we're looking forward to being silly. You'll have to see what kind of silly hats and filters we have planned, or not planned yet, for the rest of the week. So thank you, Dr. Zola. And
you're very welcome.
For
and
everyone,
a good Purim to everyone, a happy Purim, and everyone now stay well and stay safe and stay in touch.
Thank you.